This passage is adapted from Sabine Tebic and Irmgard Teschke. Why do woodpecker finches use tools? Woodpecker finches use twigs to catch insect prey deep within trees. In an experimental study, we investigated whether twig tool use in woodpecker finches is acquired socially. This seemed plausible since previous studies have shown that several forms of tool use in primates develop via social learning. We took whole broods from the Galapagos Islands. We split each brood into two groups. Half of the chicks were reared with a tool using model, and the other half were reared with a non tool using model. We found that young woodpecker finches that never had the opportunity to watch tool use developed this ability with similar aptitude and reached distinct developmental steps that marked the appearance of new tool oriented behavior at a similar age as their siblings that were given the chance to observe tool use in adult woodpecker finches. We concluded that, in contrast to chimpanzees, social learning is not necessary for the acquisition of this behavior in woodpecker finches. Instead, the developmental process seemed to be strongly dependent on genetically fixed components. Interestingly, New Caledonian crows also appear to have a specific genetic predisposition for tool use, as demonstrated by the finding that they develop basic use of stick tools without a tool using model. However, in contrast to our study, a tool using demonstrator, a human in the study on New Caledonian crows, stimulated faster development of tool use in juvenile New Caledonian crows. Field observations also show that these crow parents scaffold the development of wild tool manufacture and use in juveniles for up to 1 year. Juveniles stay close to their parents and are provided with discarded tools. The early exposure to this discarded tool might help juveniles form a mental template of functional tool design. Information about woodpecker finch's social system can shed some light on the reasons for the strong genetic predetermination of tool use in this species. For one thing, in contrast to socially living primates, woodpecker finches are solitary and thus parents are likely to be the only available tool using models. In such a system, reliance on social transmission from parents to offspring during an association would be a highly risky endeavor. Where the likelihood of encountering important social information is uncertain, selection for a development process based on genetically fixed components could be advantageous, especially given that tool use provides an important part of the woodpecker finch's diet and seems crucial to survival during the dry season in the island's arid zone. Although our experiment showed that the development of tool use is based on a very specific genetic predisposition, we were able to demonstrate that non-social individual learning does play an important role during the ontogeny or development within an organism's lifetime of tool use and serving to improve the efficiency of this behavior. 5 individuals developed tool using techniques that deviated from the tool use performed by birds in the wild, most likely because our artificial crevices differed from natural crevices and tree holes. At some point during the study, each of these birds dropped their tool into the artificial crevice and pulled it out with an upward motion of their beak, thereby levering the prey to within reach at the front of the crevice. After initial success with this technique, the 5 birds significantly increased their use of this method. These and other observations on learning in tool using woodpecker finches have altered our conception of how this behavior develops. The ontogenetic unfolding of this complex behavior is determined by a very specific genetic component, but is enhanced through individual learning. Okay. 42, the main purpose of the passage is to contrast the tool using behavior of wild and captive raised woodpecker finches. Describe experiments intended to clarify the benefits of tool use for woodpecker finches. Discuss a study of the differences between primates and woodpecker finches with respect to tool use. Present research that explains the development of tool using behavior in woodpecker finches. So this is D very clearly. The passage is interested in explaining how and why woodpecker finches use tools. Option A is wrong because there is no comparison between wild and captive woodpecker finches. We are not talking about the benefits. I mean, the experiments are not for the benefits. Their benefits are already known. And the focus is not on the difference between primates and woodpeckers, right? It can reasonably be inferred from the passage that the design of the researcher's experiment helped to minimize the possibility that there were important differences between the two groups of chicks other than the model with which the groups were reared. Responses of any individual chick to the model were influenced by the responses of other chicks in the same group. Acquisition of tool using behavior in both groups were influenced by the particular tools available. Identifying when chicks reach different developmental stages of tool using behavior dependent on human evaluation of chicks' actions. So I'm leaning towards A here because that you don't want the two groups, the control and the experimental group, to have any differences, right? You want to minimize any differences between them so that the thing that you are trying to test, which in this case is the use of tools, is what gets tested, right? So I'm leaning towards A, but let's work with the line numbers. So this is the April test. Okay. So 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 9. 1, 2, 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 9. And 16 to 19. Okay. 16 to 19. So in an experimental study, we investigated whether twig tool use in woodpecker is acquired socially. This seemed plausible since previous studies have shown several forms of tool use in primates. We took whole broods from the Galapagos Islands. We split each brood into two groups. Half the chicks were raised with the tool using model, right? And then we concluded that, yeah, so I think option C, because option C is the only option which talks about minimizing the possibility of differences between the broods. Every brood was split into two groups, right? So that's why option A seems like a good answer. And this is option C. As used in line 20 and 47, fixed most nearly means 20 and 47. 47. Okay. Instead, the developmental process seems to be strongly dependent on genetically fixed components, the genetically predetermined components, right? Because this behavior is not learned socially. So genetically determined components, repaired or attached, they have a physical connotation that doesn't fit the context here, and prepared also doesn't fit the context. The parenthetical statement in lines 26 to 27 mainly serves to. So let's look at lines 26. A human in the study, okay, in contrast to our study, a tool using demonstrator stimulated faster development. Okay, so they're trying to contrast, they're trying to explain the point of contrast between the Finches and the Caledonian study in the sense that with the Caledonians, it was a demonstrator, a human being that was used. So contrast the prevalence of tool use among New Caledonian crows with the prevalence of tool use. Explain why the results of the Caledonian study conflicted with those of the Finch study. Indicate a difference between the design of the Caledonian crow study and the Finch study. Suggest that the methods of the New Caledonian study should be adopted. So it's C, right? This just explains that difference between the design of the studies, that the Caledonian study used a human sort of tool teacher, while in the case of the Finches, it was their parents. The passage most strongly suggests that the social system of primates allows for young animals to regularly observe other members of their species using tools, reach maturity without having learned to use tools to acquire food, restrict the transmission of tool-related knowledge to close relatives only. An experimental tool designed at little risk of lost food if the designs are unsuccessful. Okay, is this? No. So I think I'm leaning towards A because that was the whole point of socialization in primates. Um, yeah, in contrast to socially living primates, they are solitary and thus parents are likely to be the only available tool using models. In such a system, reliance on social transmission from parents to offspring during an association would be a highly risky endeavor. Reliance on social transmission would be a risky behavior. Uh, right. So, what that means is that you can't really rely on the offspring to learn tool usage if it was just through parents, right? Because that is not sufficient learning information, unlike primates where it's socially learned. Uh, yeah, so I would yeah, actually it would be D, right? Because the thing is that this line tells you why it's D, because in the case of in the case of finches, if they relied on social transmission from parents, that would be a highly risky endeavor. But in the case of primates, they don't have to worry about that because they can experiment without worrying about losing food, because there is a social transmission. It's not just through parents. Okay, yeah, so D is the right answer. Okay, based on the passage, the researchers' conclusion that the woodpecker finches who used the novel leveling technique were displaying individual learning is supported in part by the fact that no genetic variations were common to all those finches that were not also common to all the finches that did not use that technique. Those finches tended to stop using the technique after the researchers altered the artificial crevices to reduce its effectiveness. The portion of that technique that deviates from typical tool using behavior takes place inside a crevice and is therefore difficult for other finches to observe and acquire socially. There's probably not a naturally occurring circumstance that would have favored the development of that technique and its prior transmission to those finches. Okay, so before we come to the answer, let's mark the line numbers 58 to 62 and 62 to 67. 58 to 62, 62 to 67. Then you have 67 to 69, 71 to 74. 67 to 69, 71 to 74. And we are looking at evidence for the fact that there were these woodpecker finches who used the novel leveling technique. And the conclusion that was reached is supported by what, right? So 5 individuals developed tool using techniques that deviated from the tool use performed by birds in the wild, most likely because our artificial crevices differed from natural crevices and tree holes. Okay, so that is one reason that our artificial crevices differed. At some point during the study, each of these birds dropped their tool into the artificial crevice, thereby leveraging the prey. So this is just describing what they did. So I don't think this is the answer. After initial success, the birds significantly increased their use of this method. Again, the ontogenetic unfolding of this complex pair is determined by a very specific genetic component, but is enhanced through individual learning. So the genetic, yeah, so I'm leaning towards option A. So let me just go back to the options. So no genetic variations were common to all those finches that were not also common. So this is not even a question that the passage raises, right? We know that they are all genetically similar. The individual learning bit is coming from the fact that, that there was, no, it didn't alter it. So B is out. There's probably, okay, I'm just going to read that again. So it says that, so they did it, the ontogenetic unfolding, individual learning. Okay, so there is a genetic, okay, is maybe D, individual learning. So it's actually indicating that there is not a naturally occurring circumstance, right? So there is a sense of artificiality about it. Yeah, so I'm going with D. And because of that artificiality, there was a sense of learning. So yeah. So there's a sense of artificiality. So I'm going with that. And yeah, and I'm going to stick with option 1 because that talks about the artificial nature of the crevice. Okay. Okay, as used in line 71, conception most nearly means conception. Altered our conception of how this behavior develops, our understanding of how this behavior develops, our understanding, right? Beginning doesn't fit the context, design, invention, none of them fit the context. According to table 1, the mean number of instances, okay, I'll just open this elsewhere. According to table 1, the mean number of instances that woodpecker finches raised without tool using models used twigs and tools was, okay, woodpecker raised without tool using models used twigs as tool, the mean number of instances was 5.6. So that's C. The data in table 2 best support which statement about woodpecker finches that used the unique levering technique to acquire prey. Okay. So effect of success with unique levering technique on frequency of levering technique. Before first success and after first success, median frequency of prey levering increased and range of prey levering attempts also increased, right? So at least one of them attempted the technique 5 times before successfully acquiring prey. After the first success, a few of them ceased using the technique altogether. After the first success, none of them attempted the technique more than 5 times. None of them were successful in their first attempt. Okay, so we are looking at, there were 5 of them, right? 5 individuals use these techniques. Okay, and now we are trying to support something about their behavior. So let me just open this again. So median frequency of prey levering attempts per observation went from 1 to 11, and the range went from, okay, so 0 to 5, 4 to 21. Okay. Okay, at least one of them attempted the technique 5 times before successfully. Okay, after the first success, a few of them ceased. No, we don't have any evidence for B. None of them attempted. No, there's no evidence for C. None of them were successful in their first attempt. No, we can't say that. I think A would be the right answer because, yeah, because there is a value of 5 in the range, which means that one of them at least must have tried 5 times before successfully acquiring prey. Yeah, so I'm going with A. Let's grade this 42. Yeah, DACBC, DACBC 47, ADABCA. 47 is A. Okay, ADABCA. Okay, 47 is A. Regularly observe other members, right? I think I was leaning towards A initially before I changed my answer. Let me just, we found that young woodpecker finches Okay. In contrast to chimpanzees. Okay. Then we talk about New Caledonian. Right. And then we talked about, in contrast to socially living primates, they are solitary and thus parents are likely to be the only. I thought they were indicating that there would be a risk for food. Yeah, I thought that there was. I was not sure. Let me just confirm if 47 is A. Yeah, I was not sure that this regularly observed was necessarily supported in the passage, but I thought that they were indicating that because it was socially learned, there was less risk of lost food, right? But yeah, but the answer is A.